Okay, so hey guys and welcome back to another Axel 72 video, and in today's video I'm going to be giving my reaction to Angelo Liao winning via majority decision versus Tomoki Kameda out in Japan. And so if you are new around here and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so, like the video if you do indeed like the video, and let's get straight into it. So like I say, it was a majority decision, but in my opinion, maybe that's a little bit, going in towards the Japanese fighter, the home fighter's favourite. It was a good close fight where, Liao started good and won quite a few of the early rounds, in my opinion, where probably he won 4 or 5 of the, first six, and was landing his jab and was boxing pretty disciplinedly. And to be fair, that's not really something we'd seen too much of in high level fights for Angelo Liao. Whenever he's fought at a high level and things have gotten tough, he's kind of resorted to come forward pressure, just really spraying shots all over the place, going to the body, which he did do quite nicely in this fight as well. But like I say, whenever he was throwing his jab, he was having a lot of success. He was moving well, and he definitely showcased the high level of conditioning in which he does have. Throughout the whole fight, he was moving very well, and Kameda was able to stand his ground and kind of was allowed to stand in the middle of the ring. And to be fair, that did surprise me a little bit. Liao typically, like I say, can be a good pressure fighter and can be a come forward type of fighter, but he allowed to Kameda to be in the to stand in the middle and to keep control of the center, and he was just moving and continually, like I say, picking off the moments throughout the majority of the fight, was throwing first, and that was inevitably why he was able to pick off the rounds in which he did pick off. There was a few rounds, of course, which I gave to Kameda. I had Liao winning by 4 rounds, and that's what one of the judges had it. I don't know how one of the judges realistically had it as a draw, but it was a close fight at times, and Kameda was definitely utilizing his experience throughout the most part of the fight. He was often at times just throwing flurries in the kind of latter part of the round, just to have a bit of an eye-catching moment right near the end of the round to perhaps sway the judges in his favor. And that is a experienced fighter's move. And also at the same time, whenever he threw, the Japanese crowd got behind him and jeered him on every time that he threw. So again, that's another thing that probably did sway one of the judges to more so give it as a draw. And something in which Kameda also did, which was very much an experience thing, was utilize his head a lot. The ref really didn't pick up on it, and he was very quick to pick up on the low blows from Liao, which, low blows are low blows. There was a couple thrown from Liao, and, I'm glad that he didn't get a point deducted, because I mean, I don't think that would have changed the scorecards enough for him to have lost. I think it probably would have still gone into his favor, but it could have made it a draw. But Liao was getting pushed back a lot by Kameda's head. Kameda was able to keep a lot of the center of the ring just from bulldozing with his head a lot of the time, kind of Matador-esque. Just bull going forwards head first and just really forcing Liao back, because otherwise he's just going to get caught with a headbutt. There was a couple head clashes to start off the fight. I'm glad there was no noticeably big cut, and to be fair, the way that Kameda was fighting, it was surprising that there wasn't any big cuts. But that's definitely a strategy in which Kameda had learned throughout his experience and the amount of fights in which he's had. And yeah, it was a bit of a dirty to an extent strategy, but it made him, like I say, maintain center ring and, yeah, like I say, seemingly push back Liao, even though he wasn't really landing punches when he was doing it. And also at the same time, he wasn't really doing much in a good way when he was pushing him back. He wasn't always making the most of it. And Liao in the earlier rounds was able to utilize his head movement quite well, and Kameda wasn't necessarily able to land too many shots. But when it went into the the later rounds and the mid rounds, there was definitely parts of the fight where they were both just stood toe to toe, and they were just both fighting in a phone box. And I think it showcased this fight a real kind of good mix between fighting inside and then also fighting at a mid range as well. I think it showcased that Liao is very adaptable as a fighter and is quite a good, well rounded fighter, because not many fighters can go from fighting, a nice technical, seemingly disciplined early part of the fight to then, to the mid to late-ish rounds, fighting in the phone box for quite a lot of it, to then, round 11, round 12, he picked back up off his jab again, and I had him winning the final 2 rounds, and they were, so important for him to win, especially, with the judges' scorecards and the fact it was out in Japan as well. And so, full credit to Liao, and like I say, arguably he did deserve a unanimous decision, so, I'm not really going in for a rematch or anything like that for this fight, but it was definitely an important fight. Like I touched upon in my prediction, I thought Liao would be able to win via stoppage, but inevitably I said Liao would win via decision. But like I picked up on, he, when he fought Fulton, he really needed to showcase that there was, he lost, and that was not a bad defeat, but it was a defeat in which was his first defense. So he really needed to showcase in this fight that he was deserving and warranting of being a world champion, because, arguably a lot of fans would have just said that it was a lucky shot versus Lopez, and, he didn't prove or, utilize that he was a, suitable world champion when he was world champion last time. So he needed to do that, and he did that well. And like I say, away from home, you got to give him the credit going and taking the challenge away from home, and he picked up the win that he needed to pick up. And now he moves on. Arguably, I would probably like to see him have another perhaps voluntary defense before he goes on to try and go for any big unifications. I think, this was showcased by Probox, but if he is still signed with Top Rank, then, or, if he is still willing to fight with Top Rank, then of course there's some good names in the division for him to, fight against. But, at the same time, he could go on to fight one of the other champions. If not, maybe something like a Trinidad could be a good fight, like I touched upon in my predictions video. So, like I say, I wouldn't go amiss if he went and fought in another voluntary defense. But about the other fight that was on this card, which was another world title fight, being Pedro Taduran, the rematch versus Genjiro Shigeoka for, of course, that of the IBF World Minimum Weight title. Pedro Taduran won via split decision. Again, this was a bit crazy of the scorecards, to be fair. They had it, I think they both, two of them had it 2 rounds, each to each fighter. And then the last one had it 8 rounds to Taduran, which was, a little bit crazy. But at the same time, Taduran was coming forward the entire fight. So if you like that front foot pressure, which seemingly that judge really did, then you've got to give it to Taduran in that kind of favor. And I did have Taduran winning. I think Shigeoka had the capabilities to have won that fight, and there was rounds, and I think he won the last round, Shigeoka, but there was definitely rounds in that fight where he was boxing well, and whenever he planted his feet, and but also, moved around at the same time. He got his movement going nicely, but that he had to plant his feet at the right moments, and he did do that in a few rounds. But there was also some rounds in which, I think it was round 11, where he just started dropping his hands for no reason and trying to box really flash. And, like I say, the first fight he was really trying to go toe to toe with Taduran, and I think it was an ego thing perhaps. But in this one, like I say, he was able to showcase he had that superior skill and was moving well. But whenever he just started moving, he was just dropping his hands for some reason. And yes, his movement was good, but Taduran was basically able to land whenever he tried, because Shigeoka was moving, but he had his hands so low and his guard was so weak that inevitably, even if Taduran missed a few punches, he was able to land one big one at some point, because Shigeoka's hands were so low, and the shots in which he was actually throwing when he was moving were just so weak and just pouring type of punches, which against somebody like a Pedro Taduran, you can't just be standing toe to toe, and you can't just be moving trying to pour the entire time. You kind of have to get a bit of a mix, or at least if you are going to be moving, then you just got to try keep your hands a bit better, and that's just what Shigeoka didn't really do well enough. And inevitably, I think Taduran did do enough to win. He didn't go to the body quite as much as what he did in the first fight, which was a little bit surprising. I thought he would be utilizing that quite a lot, but inevitably, I think he did exactly what he had to do to be able to win. I think his style was always going to be bullish and perhaps be physically a bit too much for Shigeoka, especially when he's still, a young guy, young fighter. But I think it is going to, harm his career. Now, back-to-back defeats for him. But for Taduran, he's stated to claim for himself as a world champion. Arguably this perhaps is the the end of the hype around the Shigeoka brothers, because they both lost quite surprisingly. Then they went and both had rematches. Then they've just both lost the rematches. So possibly we could see a trilogy here because it was a close split decision. But inevitably, I don't really want to. I would much prefer to see Pedro Taduran versus Melvin Jerusalem as an all Filipino unification fight. I think that could be an excellent fight, and then the winner of that to go on to fight the best in the division in Oscar Collazo. I think that's what makes sense and that should happen, but we will have to wait and see. But yeah, that is it for today's video. I hope you did enjoy. Like video if you did, indeed like video, subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.